This is great.
You are now being judged. If you've ever spent any time in the competitive horse community, you've heard this phrase a time or two. Some people ask why anybody would pay to be judged. Well, today I'm going to discuss the culture of the competitive horseback riding community, specifically the hunter-jumper discipline, as that is what I'm most familiar with. Nearly my entire life has been spent ringside, competing or cheering my friends on. I've watched both children and adults walk into the ring with the biggest grin on their face and leave in tears. Not everyone can handle such a subjective sport. To better explain the culture of the hunter-jumper community, I will discuss 3 topics: dedication, judging bias, and payout. First, I'd like to speak to you about the dedication competitive horseback riding requires. My entire life, I've never known any better. Riding horses is one of the most exciting sports anyone can participate in, and it teaches discipline and hard work. Riders are frequently reminded that life isn't always fair. They will spend 40 plus hours a week preparing for competition, whether that be riding, caring for their horse, or cleaning. If you ask any equestrian the reason that they do it, they would tell you that it's because they love horses. Training is not always fun for the riders. As George Morris once said, if you're not going to the hospital, you're getting back on. Everything you do in riding is a team effort, and when your teammate is a 1,200-pound animal, things can be a little tricky, especially because they can't speak English. Sometimes your horse just decides he doesn't want to do it today, and those days are really the hardest. In order to remain competitive, you will need to show the majority of weekends to keep your skills up to par with everyone else. And if you want to win a year-end award like this one, you better go to every single show. Judges know the hard work that every rider puts in to make it to this competition, and you'd think that judges would want to reward it. However, the success in the horse community comes down to one thing: money. But we'll dive into that more later. Now that we've talked about my first main point, I'd like to move on to my second, which is the judging bias. In the hunter-jumper world, your success comes down to one thing, and that's money. In riding, the more money you spend, the likelihood of taking home that blue ribbon you've always dreamed about increases. The more money you have, the better equipment and apparel you can afford to purchase. Money also comes into play with the quality of horse you're able to compete on. Similar to when you're buying a car, the more money you can afford for fancier upgrades, the better car you could purchase, right? Well, the same goes for horses. The fancier the horse, the more expensive the trainer is going to cost to keep that horse going. As you can see, it all adds up. Both the showing and the judging community are a small, tight-knit group with a significant chance of crossover. The more well-known you are because of previous events or even who you train under can increase your chances of winning and provide you with more riding opportunities. Because of the way horseback riding is scored, it's impossible to prove judging bias. Exhibitors must demonstrate their skills by piloting their horse over a course of 2 jumps. Essentially, the goal is to make it look effortless when you jump. After your course, you will be asked to enter an under-saddle portion, which is judged solely on your horse's movement. At least, that's what it's supposed to be judged on. At bigger shows, the courses tend to become more difficult. Taylor St. Jock, a very successful rider, said in an interview about Devon, a championship horse show on the East Coast, "It's a lot more technical here. You can't just coast around, and if you get lucky, you get lucky. You really have to know how to ride the courses here to be successful." The U.S. Equestrian Federation rule, HU 122, defines what judges are scoring on. The rule states, an even hunting pace, manners, jumping style together with faults and way of moving over the course. As you can see, it gives judges a lot of leeway. Even if your course was essentially flawless, a judge could poorly score you due to a personal bias and wouldn't face any repercussion. This is because you can't publicly view your scorecards in the hunter-jumper world. A personal example is 2 years ago at the Virginia Horse Shows Association Summer Show. I blatantly completed the wrong course and still won. The judge that day was best friends with the woman I trained under. Now that we've covered judging bias, I'd like to move on to the payout. Any horse instructor will tell you there is no money to be made in horses. Unless you're involved in breeding, you're not going to make what you put in. If you're lucky, you will break even every month. Once you add up how much you've spent to care for your horse, to purchase your attire and equipment, train your horse, travel to events, and compete, the value of that $5,000 check that you just won goes down. If you want to be in the professional and the horse industry, you have to be doing it because you love it. You have to be okay with taking a loss some months. Most importantly, you have to weigh out all the good and the bad involved in horses in your life. Is it worth it? This cutthroat culture isn't for everyone, and that's okay. Sometimes you have to ask yourself if standing outside all day in the heat is to potentially get a 60-cent ribbon worth it. Mentally, you have to understand the reason you didn't win isn't always your fault. Sometimes you really deserve to win, and you don't. In closing, we've discussed how dedication, judging bias, and payout affects the culture of the hunter-jumper community. We have discussed how much dedication is required, how the judging bias can be incredibly frustrating for competitors, why the payout in the end doesn't amount to much fiscally, so you really have to be passionate about the sport. I would like to end with my favorite riding quote by George Morris. Think of riding as a science, but love it as an art.